Shalom Aleichem, Assalamu Alaikum, Irini Mazisu, Pax Vobiscum, peace be unto you, and welcome to 2nd Samuel, chapter 17. There are 29 verses. There's quite a lot of content, so let's get right into it. Verse 2 says terror versus afraid. Verse 3, there's an omission of as a bride returns to her husband. So this is Ahithophel telling Absalom, I'm going to bring the people back to you as a bride returns to her husband. Only you seek the life of one man, and all the people shall have peace. In the Septuagint, the Masoretic says, the man whom you seek is as if all returned, so all the people shall be in peace. So what does this even mean? Well, first of all, in the Septuagint, it reads like this. This is how I interpret it. Get rid of your father, King David, and you will rule in peace. There will be peace. The people will live in peace if you get rid of your father, because he's a warmonger. He's going to explain later on. And the Masoretic reads like this. This is my interpretation. Your father, King David, is as if everyone returned. What does that mean? It's cryptic. It's hard to even understand. It's nonsensical. It doesn't make any sense. And so all the people will live in peace because it's like everyone returned. Again, just sounds like a lot of randomness. So it makes more sense in the Septuagint, obviously. Verse 4, was right in the eyes of Absalom versus it pleased Absalom. Verse 5, it actually refers to Hushai as the Arachite here, or the Arakite, for the first time in the Septuagint. Okay, versus the Archite. Verse 7, this one time is not good versus not good at this time. So in the Septuagint, it is focusing on the word said versus the timing of the words. Verse 8, bitter in their spirit versus chafed in their minds. Chafed in their minds means, or could mean irritated, it could mean annoyed, it could mean vexed. And there's an omission of what is in the brackets, and this seems to be an addition in any case because it is written in italics, and as a wild boar in the plain. Significant difference as well in the verse. Will not give the people rest. So there will be no peace because of continual war being waged by King David. Again, he's a man of war. Versus, he will not lodge with the people. So King David won't stay with the people. He won't live there. He's going to live away from them, perhaps. It's the implication. Verse 9, pit versus hills. So the question is, why would David hide in a pit? That is a place you go to be trapped. But as we'll see later on, pits are hiding places, or wells are hiding places. So that is not exactly the best question that I posed there. It actually is a place you can hide. Significant difference in verse 9. It shall come to pass when he falls upon them at the beginning that some will certainly hear. So I read this as when David falls on his enemies, someone will hear about it or witness the sound of him falling on his enemies. Versus, it will come to pass when some of them be overthrown at the first, that whosoever hears it will say. So, in other words, David and his men are defeated, and then someone will hear the sound of their defeat and then say the following. The words here, there has been a slaughter among the people that follow after Absalom. So why would they jump to that conclusion when they hear the sound? Unless it means he being someone else. I'm not sure who he would be referring to besides King David. Why wouldn't he just say, you, Absalom? Okay, moving ahead. Verse 11. It says here, and that thy presence go in the midst of them. Versus that you go to battle in your own person. So being among them. Okay, is this still Absalom? Okay, it is. So Absalom, go in the middle of the people, be among them, versus go into battle in your own person. So fight, go into the battlefield alone, on your own. Verse 12, encamp against him, which means to set up a military camp, pretty straightforward, versus light upon him, which means rest upon him. That can also mean set up camp, if we're really stretching it. Verse 13, there's an omission of refuge with his army. Okay, so he's not simply going into a city, he's actually taking refuge with his army, not by himself, in a city. Verse 17 says here, for they might not be seen. It's in both translations. What that means in our modern vernacular is to say, for they were not trying to be seen, meaning they were trying to be stealthy or incognito. They were not trying to draw attention to themselves. They were trying to be invisible, essentially. They did not want to be seen. And then it says here, maidservant versus a wench. Now, a wench can be understood as a prostitute, perhaps, whereas a maidservant is simply a female servant. But a wench can also mean a girl or a young woman. But another connotation, a negative one, is to mean a prostitute. Verse 19, this should read barley in both translations, since corn is not a Middle Eastern crop. Okay, I'm going to keep reiterating that every chance I get. Verse 23, talking about Ahithophel. So he actually gave orders to his household, so his subordinates or perhaps his family, versus put his household in order, which means to maybe clean his house or organize his house or organize his affairs that need to be dealt with before his death. Verse 25, it says here, Jether or Yether of Jezreel versus Yithra, an Israelite. So Jezreel is not the same as Israel, I don't think. Don't believe so. 28, 10 embroidered beds with double coverings and 10 cauldrons versus beds and basins. So we can see there's a lot more to these than just simply beds. They are embroidered and they have double coverings, and they're not basins, they're cauldrons. Verse 29, faint versus weary, which essentially means weak due to hunger. So let's look up Jezreel before we wrap up. Jezreel is not Israel. It is a city, part of Issachar. Okay, so that's the conclusion there. And I wanted to talk about the narrative. I normally don't do this, but this is one of the most exciting books. Actually, all the books of the kings, which again we call them the books of the kingdoms, which are 1 Samuel, 2 Samuel, 1 Kings, and 2 Kings, which anciently were all recognized as one book or belonging to a set of books called the books of the kingdoms. Now, I forgot to mention, this is such an interesting narrative because David has his spies, as you know, and they are collecting information for him. And essentially, Hushai, who is the chief friend of David, his counsel is seen as superior to Ahithophel's counsel. That leads him to feel, dejected or rejected, and then he ends up hanging himself, committing suicide. And then we see that David's informants, multiple informants. So we have who do we have here? We have a number of them. I just passed their names right now, but where is it? I wrote here that my pulse elevated. That's how exciting this was for me. It's verse 16, around there. So we can see that Jonathan or Jonathan and Ahimaaz were waiting, but they had to receive the reports from Zadok and Abiathar. So they received word from Hushai initially. So he was the one who, again, his counsel was superior, perceived as such, to Ahithophel. So he secretly spoke to Zadok and Abiathar, and then they also reported to David via Jonathan and Ahimaaz. But it was the maidservant who was sent by, again, the priests, Zadok and Abiathar. And then it was Jonathan and Ahimaaz who had to jump down a lady's well, hide there, wait till those who were searching for them left. They had this elaborate plan. They even covered up the well, put barley all over it, hid their hiding place essentially. And then when they left, that's when they got out of the well or the pit. And then they reported to King David. And they had to do this quickly, because if he waited, if they waited, and if David stuck around any longer, if he just stayed there, they would have found him and killed him. Because it says that Absalom crossed over Jordan, all the men of Israel with him. But actually, I should say that David and his men passed over the Jordan before the day, so until the morning light. So they made their escape during the nighttime. And then when Absalom and his men crossed over Jordan, they couldn't find him. He was nowhere to be found, King David. So, and then we can see how he eventually found refuge. David came to Mahanaim, so that's where he found refuge. And then we have these individuals here who brought him and his men places to sleep and much cutlery, not really cutlery, but vessels to eat with, and lots of food and yeah, the supplies. So that's all for this chapter. There's so much in this narrative. It's, again, one of my favorite parts of scripture is the books of the kingdoms. So thank you very much for your time and attention. Till next time, I bid you all Shalom Alechem. Yevarechacha Adonai ve'yishmerecha. Assalamu alaikum wa rahma tulahi wa barak atu. Irini mazisu pax vobiscum. Peace be unto you. May Adonai bless you and protect you. And until next time, Maranatha.